talking today to Richard Hoskins, who is the author of a book called The Boy in the River. Richard, this book is about a limbless, headless torso of a small boy who was fished out of the Thames in 2001. What happened after that occurred?
Well, the police initially brought in a forensic pathologist from South Africa who tried to look at the body and said perhaps there was something ritualistic about the death. The police then seemed to get into a bit of a dead end with it. Didn't really know where they were going because they had no identity for the boy. They really didn't know actually what kind of ritual killing it was, and they had nothing to go on actually. And it is an extraordinary fact that one more tide and the torso would have been washed away out to sea, and nobody would have ever known any more about this. So they heard me giving a broadcast on Radio 4 and called me because my background was African religions, and I came into the case and was able to give them a little bit more of a steer and a push, and things began to gather pace with forensics backing up some of the
And it started by looking at Muti in South Africa.
It did.
Describe what Muti is.
Well, Muti, fairly ghoulishly really, is about the removal of body parts. I mean, actually, the Zulu word Muti just means medicine, and it's about the harvesting of animal or plant parts and using those for healing, some of which are, in Western terms, indeed definably true for healing or justifiable for healing. For instance, in the West we use aspirin, which obviously is derivative from the willow tree, so it's not something that we're that unfamiliar with in this country. But that's the idea of Muti. But in this particular case, what we're talking about is Muti murder, where there is a trade in extreme cases of the removal of body parts from victims for use in medicine, and it's frowned upon by almost all sangomas, the healers, but it does go on.
Eventually the trail took you to Nigeria and to the Yoruba part of Nigeria. Describe how you got to there.
Well, I looked at the pictures of the torso, and it actually became apparent to me fairly early on that actually it wasn't Muti for all sorts of reasons. For a start, the boy who was nicknamed Adam didn't have any of his internal organs removed. That would be highly unusual. If they were going to kill him for Muti and had gone to the trouble of removing his limbs, you would think normally they would have taken some of the prized parts from inside. They didn't. His genitals were intact, again, highly unusual. And he was circumcised. Now, circumcision is not something that's practiced very routinely in South Africa for children that young. It does exist a little bit, but not very, very much. Whereas it's practiced quite routinely in parts of West Africa. And I began to think that actually we're dealing here with a different type of ritual killing. And in fact, by looking at the forensics more closely, we worked out that the blood had been drained from his body, his throat had been slit very carefully. Horrendous though all of this is, it pointed towards sacrifice and a West African sacrifice of that.
And there was a break in the case when a woman who came forward saying that she had been involved in this.
Yeah. And
where did that lead?
Well, the woman in question, Joyce Ozigiedi, had already told an immigration officer that she was involved in one of her children previously being sacrificed by her husband. And the immigration officer, when he heard about the evidence that I was suggesting and the forensics was suggesting, told the police in London, who then began to take an interest in her, but ultimately paid her a visit. And we found in her apartment in Glasgow an identical pair of shorts to the ones which were clothed on the torso Adam, very rare, unusual shorts that we know were bought in from a Woolworths chain in Germany. And so the evidence trail began suddenly to build up, and we began to build quite a big picture about this woman Joyce and the fact that she had indeed had Adam in her care and had brought him into the country.
The case is never solved, but there is a kind of resolution where a television crew speaks to...
Yeah, Joyce Ozigiedi she was deported back to Nigeria. It's a strange story that the Home Office deported her prior to the police really finishing their inquiries, and went to the trouble of providing an executive jet to fly her back that had just been used by a world-famous footballer. Quite why they did that, I don't really know, and I don't know whether anyone knows. You can look for a conspiracy theory there perhaps, but we don't know quite why they did it, but they did. Deported her back, and then a whole lot of evidence mounted up against her. She has since made a confession to Nigerian police and also to a TV crew Now the trouble is that she's now in Nigeria, and I think for the CPS it would be a monumental step to bring her over when there's no other supporting evidence. But in terms of closure on the case, we also had the traffickers who were caught. The traffickers around her and Adam were caught and charged, and the leader, the ringleader, who was definitely associated with the Adam case, was convicted for 4 years for trafficking.
And the connection with trafficking is that the boy named Adam was brought to London.
He was, and some of the documentation was found in that trafficking gang, and also documentation associated with Joyce Ozigiedi, who had brought him into this country. So there was a trail, and enough of a trail to link it to the Adam case, but that's as far as we got.
I want to take it out onto a kind of wider framework now. We're talking about words like witchcraft, superstition, all of these kinds of words. Give us some idea of the kinds of things that people believe in Africa that can be put into these kind of containers, and how they compare to our own beliefs here in Europe.
I think it's very important to recognise that the belief in some sort of evil eye is pretty universal. It's a pretty global belief, and has been historically, and is at the moment. So I think while some people might think Kindoki is something quite outlandish, actually in its traditional form.
And Kindoki is a Congolese word for...
It's a Congolese word for witchcraft.
Yeah.
Sorry, yes. And likewise Juju in Nigeria. It really just means the evil eye, and it's not actually that different from what a lot of people believe, whether it's not wanting to walk under a ladder, or checking their horoscope each day just to make sure that they have good luck, or crossing their fingers, or wearing a St. Christopher cross if they're not necessarily making a particular statement about their belief in Jesus Christ, but they just wear it perhaps for good luck. And that is really what Kindoki traditionally was all about. It was about the fact that in the world there are good and bad powers, and you need to control the bad powers through some sort of charms and maybe some sort of protective devices of sorts. But it's not that outlandish in its traditional form.
But they're quite powerful beliefs, aren't they? I mean, if you watch any sort of 1 in 3 Nollywood movies will feature somebody who has had some form of evil eye put on them.
Yes.
And these are powerful forces.
They are very powerful, and this is where the traditional healers, whether it's the Sangomas in South Africa or the Ngangas in Central Africa or the Babalawo in West Africa come in. They are there to control these forces, and and through obviously being paid some money, of course, but also through the use of charms and such like, they are able to protect people. But what has happened lately is that all of this has changed, and there's been this extraordinary transformation in the use of that whole idea of Kindoki witchcraft, and I'm using Kindoki here outside of its origin in Congo for really sub-Saharan Africa. That idea has now completely changed, and it's become something very different with the heady mix of new forms of Christianity from the West. It's now become something really different, a sort of Frankenstein monster, if you like, that was never traditionally African, and arguably isn't actually traditionally Christian either. It's something wholly new and very frightening.
But to understand that, I think we need to sort of step back and talk about how, say, the Kimbangists merge beliefs in Christianity and beliefs in traditional African beliefs. And if you could describe the Kimbangist sect, it might be useful to kind of...
Which comes in the book, in The Boy in the River. There's a chapter or two about that on my journeys to their centre. I think one of the issues we might come on to is whether there's such a thing as a pure form of Christianity, and I would argue very strongly that there isn't. Christianity is always cultural, has always been embedded in culture, and so have all religions. Kimbangoism is therefore an expression, an attempt to make an African form of Christianity. Because many Africans would say that Christianity is as culturally bound as anything else, and sometimes it takes somebody to say that for people who are within it to realise that it's true. So Kimbangoism is about a movement around a prophet called Simon Kimbangu, who really wanted to Africanise Christianity. He wanted to say that, yes, of course we believe in the traditional tenets of Christianity, but let's make it African. Let's have African worship. Let's have an African centre as a place of pilgrimage. And for some of his followers, almost, he became the Holy Spirit, and sometimes was portrayed almost in the form of the Black Messiah, so a sort of a black version of Jesus Christ, if you like. And he withstood colonialism, and very importantly, he withstood colonialism. And so the history of the movement is one in which he was tied up with the whole struggle for independence and for gaining some sort of basic rights, fundamental rights for what we now call Congolese people, and therefore he's become a very important figure as a sort of prophet, if you like, and it's one of the largest movements of independent Christian movements within Africa.
It has several million.
Yeah, they like to claim sort of 6, 7, 8 million, but there's no way of being sure. I've been to their temple twice, right out in the sticks in the Lower Congo, and it's an extraordinary building which will house 70,000 people, and it's an amazing place in Kamba, and so it's possible that, I mean, they do definitely have a very large following.